that first job you leave is the hardest. And then after that, it tends to be easier to consider hopping. So I think, yeah, just being aware that you can always go professional stability, financial stability, lots of those things that are comfortable, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, just things that were set, and realizing that if I took this leap into it, there would be a period of time where it would be a little fuzzy and it wouldn't be so sure. And so that was the part that I had to get over.
Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast exploring life-changing career moves. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the bold decisions that transform their careers and lives. Let's dive in. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, we're exploring the career of a practicing physician with 50 state licenses for general medicine, who didn't just embrace innovation, he helped lead it. Dr. Adam Carewe spent years navigating one of the largest healthcare systems in the world, transforming how doctors interact with technology and driving change from the inside out. But eventually, he realized something critical. To truly push medicine forward, he might have to step away from what made him successful in the first place. In our conversation, Adam opens up about the decision, what it cost, what it gave him, and how he's now leveraging everything from AI to informatics to build a more human-centered future for healthcare. If you've ever felt the tension between staying where you're thriving and leaving to grow, this one's for you. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Dr. Adam Carewe, a board-certified practicing physician with 50 state licenses for general medicine. He's also a clinical informaticist known for leading high-performing teams inside of one of the largest value-based healthcare organizations in the world. Now, Adam is a systems thinker, physician futurist, digital health innovator, and host of the Nerd MD's Efficiency Unlocked podcast. Now advising startups and writing about the future of healthcare and tech on his Substack, Adam's mission is very clear: to make medicine more efficient, human, and innovative by any means necessary. So hi, Adam. Thanks for joining me today on Why I Left. How you doing?
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me on here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And want to give a huge shout to Joe Desidero for hooking us up on LinkedIn. I'm always waxing poetic on how the platform connects people with the other right people. And he's an example of that. I think his actual handle is actually Master Connector. And he's like, yeah, that's a thing. So shout out to you, Joe. Thanks for putting us in touch. So Adam, I loved your background when we got connected. You blend these disciplines of clinical medicine, informatics, nutrition, and tech. And so before we kind of get into the why you left part, what originally drew you into medicine in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, for me, medicine came, like, I would say, a little bit later than maybe the traditional kind of medical student or someone who's had this thought of going to medical school. So for me, it didn't cross my mind until I was in graduate school, actually. So I finished my bachelor's degree. I wanted to pursue more education in the nutritional and exercise sciences. I was really interested in that aspect of just health and helping other people. And it was about a year into that someone plugged to me that I should, have I ever thought about becoming a nurse, a physician assistant or a physician. And so that's like actually the catalyst. I mean, it was all those things I think that led up to it ultimately, but it was starting in that space and realizing that there was this kind of further opportunity that I could do. And so that's actually when I leapt into it. So it was like a year into my master's degree and I was working in cardiac rehab and someone plugged that to me and it stuck and put me on that path.
Now, growing up, earlier in career, did you always imagine yourself as someone who'd eventually disrupt systems from the inside, or is that also something that emerged over time?
I mean, I think parts of that were kind of always there, even when I was a kid or a teenager. I mean, I remember just being a part of, different clubs and things and just I was always kind of wondering why things were done the way they were. So that aspect of it, I think, was always there. But yeah, I wasn't like someone as a kid that was trying to disrupt things left and right. I'd say that I think that just more evolved, as I got more into the depths, of medicine and healthcare and just kind of seeing the spots that I still saw were ripe for innovation or disruption.
So here, obviously, we talk about career shifts, bold moves. And so let's talk about your recent career shift. So what was the moment, or maybe it was even like an accumulation of moments that made you realize it was time to leave your role at Kaiser?
Yeah, it had been like brewing, I think, for a while. And I think it like probably brews in a lot of people. People wonder, oh, should I stick with this? Should I like look for something else? And so I wasn't in like a state of where I had to where I felt like I had to get out. I was just in a state where I was like just so interested in being on this like front edge of change and where things I thought were going in healthcare. And so I think for me it was exploring and looking for other kind of roles and opportunities. I guess the journey probably started a few years before where I was just starting to get involved in other groups that had different clinical leaders that had these non-traditional roles and responsibilities. And so I put myself around those people. And luckily, I eventually saw this job posting, which ended up being for a clinical role within general medicine. And after I started talking with them, I just figured, man, this is a great opportunity to take the leap.
Was there like a particular risk or doubt that you had to wrestle with during this decision? Like, especially, like, look, you had a lot of success within that large org. And so what are some of the things you had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot of stuff that I don't think this is specifically unique to physicians, but there's a level of stability being a physician. And then there's a level of stability being a physician, kind of in a leadership role within a larger organization too. And so I think for me, it was more kind of getting over that hurdle of that previous kind of stability. And by stability, I mean professional stability, financial stability, like lots of those things that are comfortable. Like, I mean, getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, like just things that were kind of set, and realizing that if I took this leap into it, there would be a period of time where it would be a little fuzzy and it wouldn't be so sure. And so I think that was the part that I had to kind of get over personally myself first.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that because a lot of times when I speak with folks who talk about that transition, people build up this identity. And you had this identity as a physician leader, technologist, innovator. And so how did stepping down or stepping away from the institution really affect your sense of professional identity? And how then did you or are you rebuilding or reimagining that now after leaving?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think in some ways, like this, having made this jump to like a whole new group of people who didn't know me, and where I frankly had to kind of gain their trust and kind of show them, who I was. I think it was like very similar to when I started practicing medicine in Kaiser. I was just in the clinic. And so I had my own panel. I was trying to learn and figure out how to be a good doctor on my own outside of training. I just started finding like little things where I knew I could help outside of just being part of my traditional role. And I think that's when I started at general medicine, it was kind of the same way because they hired me as a clinician. They obviously knew what my background was, but I just started trying to find little things like where I could add this value. And the thing that I think has always been my sweet spot is finding these efficiencies that we could do as on the clinical side of care delivery that make it more efficient for the doctors and clinicians. And so I just started like dabbling in that. They didn't ask me to, but I just like naturally started doing that. And we had some great tools that we could use to start experimenting with this. And ultimately those tools that I ended up making for myself ended up being rolled out globally internally for all the clinicians. And that's the same story arc that happened at Kaiser. I started building things for myself, then I started showing other people. Then it ultimately led to being a part of this informatics team, and then ultimately leading that informatics team. So it's like I've kind of just kind of naturally kind of followed that same recipe, even though I don't have it written down like a traditional recipe.
Yeah, I like that, right? And so I'm hearing build and break things and figure things out, right? Disrupting whatever that status quo is from within. Some folks who try to do that are often faced with some challenges internally. Did you have to, or did you experience any challenges or pushbacks when you were trying to innovate from inside of like a big legacy system like that?
Yeah, I think going back to when I was in Kaiser, yeah, there was a lot of layers of bureaucracy and approval. And, generally in big big systems, big companies, there's just more process behind everything. And so, I think like one thing that we did do at Kaiser, at least the physician group that I was a part of, we kind of carved out a little niche that we could do kind of comfortably as a part of that little group. And so I think that piece of it gave us like that piece of autonomy where we could kind of provide this immediate value. But yeah, the bigger things like implementing something that I felt we really needed to explore, or trying to pilot some sort of new technology, those things had a large uphill battle to be able to get to at least the start of something new.
This is part of the show I've been very excited to talk with you about because there is so much happening in healthcare, in tech, and all of these things. And what I noticed about your work, it really sits at this crossroads of digital transformation and clinical care. And so, what is something that most people you think misunderstand about the tech revolution that's happening in medicine today?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I could take that a couple different ways, but I think what's probably one of the biggest challenges right now. Yeah, I'll pivot it this way. I think on our consumer front, the stuff that we can use to help us with our health and wellness from a consumer angle is really, really advanced. I think it's the stuff works great. Our devices, our trackers, our exercise equipment, all this stuff like kind of works really seamless. And I think the challenge right now is like, and then we have these consumer tools like, ChatGPT that are just amazingly good at like helping with a variety of things that we need as a part of our life. And then I think the big challenge though is trying to incorporate these amazing consumer friendly ways into the traditional healthcare ecosystem. It's tough because there's certain things that are in there for patient protection, privacy, but there's also just like some legacy ways things have been done, and it's really hard to kind of uproot those ways and try to rethink things in a different way. That's not the traditional way that's always been done. One spot where I think is just still a real challenge. It's not to say that people in healthcare don't want to make all that stuff a part of it. I think it's just incredibly difficult with the framework and the kind of the technology and just some of the legacy processes that are in place.
Or the laws aren't necessarily keeping up with that as well. So that also makes it difficult. So I appreciate you mentioning that. You've built tools, you've advised startups, and now you host your own podcast, which I love, a fellow member of the tribe. So Nerd MDs, Efficiency Unlocked. How do you think what I like to I'll call this like your second act, right? But how has this space allowed you to serve healthcare professionals and patients better than before?
Yeah, I think like doing the podcast and having the Substack, I kind of see that as like it's my sounding board where I can, have these conversations. I can write down these thoughts that come across, because I'll have these like fleeting things where I'm like, or I'll learn about someone in the industry or a new company or a technology that I'm like, man, I want to talk to them. And I think it's just it's really kind of a way for me to share. I think that kind of those thoughts and those that interest with others, because I know there's other people out there that are kind of thinking the similar way, but maybe they don't put their voice out there. And so, I think that's been kind of the inspiration behind all that, and the reason why I wanted to start doing that. Um, I've talked about, I wanted to do a podcast for a long time, but I didn't know if I should do something that was like super narrow and kind of like a real focused topic, or something really general. But I decided to just like roll with it. And my buddy Dale and I, we were like, let's start doing this and having these conversations. And we've kind of just let it take us where it takes us. And that's the same way that I've kind of approached, writing online too, and blogging was, in that same fashion. I want to have conversations. I want to push people to think in slightly different ways, or just question, the way that we have always traditionally done things.
That's what I really like about your content. I see your posts online. I see the Substack as well, and it does get people thinking differently about what what the norms are, right? And so I like that aspect of yours. And one of the things you mentioned too, as I think about my own start into the show, I was also thinking like, oh, I should be because I, the deployment law for a little bit. And I was in HR, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna. My first idea for a show was actually like an HR show. It was gonna be like Bry the HR guy. When I was like, oh, whatever, kind of corny, but whatever. I'll acknowledge that. But then it felt very, very like specific, and so I decided to also branch out. So I feel you on that one. Let's talk a little bit about burnout, right? Because when we talk about healthcare and burnout, it's become very synonymous. I think workers, arguably, they're in a crisis when it comes to that because of so much that's going on. Do you think your transition has given you more freedom to tackle that issue in a meaningful way? And if so, how? And if not, maybe why?
Yeah, I mean, I say, I think like, personally, I went through several different kind of like, I think waves of different levels of burnout. I think burnout's an interesting thing because it's like, it's tough to pin like why it happens, I think, for an individual. So for medicine, I think the parts that really started to grind on me initially was this this belief of kind of like what it was going to be like when you became doctor, and then like the realities of what it actually was. And and I think like the parts that I got really kind of drowned in was all like the extra stuff that we had to do as a physician, just all the information that was flowing to us for our opinion, and different kind of administrative kind of tasks, and challenging patients that um were just difficult. I mean, all that stuff I think cumulatively kind of starts to weigh on you. But I think I've been always able to battle individual burnout by having like little outlets that I could also do on the side, and call them hobbies or side gigs or whatever. I mean, I think those are the things that have always kept me connected and grounded. Sometimes you take on too many little side gigs, and that can contribute to a different form of burnout where it's just like you're like overwhelmed with stuff. But I think I think having at least something that you're doing, kind of some sort of passion kind of project on the side, I think that really does keep you grounded and allows you to, flex that side of your brain that like, so you don't just get caught in, the mundane part of, your day-to-day job. And that's what's always been successful for me. And I try to, help people try and find those little things for themselves too.
I think that is super important. You mentioned something earlier about, you mentioned Chat GPT and how it's helpful for folks and just the rise of generative AI overall and clinical decision support tools. How do you see the physician's role evolving? And where do you kind of draw the ethical or practical line between augmentation and then automation as it relates to patient care?
Yeah, I mean, even before generative AI came on, I've always had this belief that we should make tools that strip away the kind of repetitive, mundane things. So even if you backtrack like pre LLM, just having really good structure in healthcare. So there was good guidelines that were in the right place at the right time for you to know what to do, and make it like the essence of like make it easy to do the right thing, and make it harder for in a workflow, and for a clinician to do the wrong thing. And I think so obviously when AI came on, we were like, oh my gosh, this is going to help in many ways. So I think the parts where it's really going to help initially, and we're already seeing this, is it's going to help in several of the tasks that we would commonly do, where we're trying to source information kind of pre-visit, and you're trying to synthesize, what's happened and the summary, and these types of things. That's like where this type of tool is amazing, for clinicians. And then obviously just the very popular tools of listening to a conversation, and creating documentation, and kind of written form of that. Obviously we see that in the note-taking apps, and same sort of tools help, during a clinical encounter. But I think like And then I think there's like this post-visit stuff, which I'd say like that's the stuff that's like I think gonna come next with kind of the new kind of generative AI. But I think the biggest thing is just peeling away those parts of each of those kind of steps of care. And I think what, the part where it gets a little bit worrisome right now is like if someone's trying to replace that whole arc with a piece of technology. I think that's like we're not ready for that yet. But I do think we need to push on I'll call it like the patient side. Like I think patients need to be able to have good vetted kind of technology that they can kind of talk with and interact with regarding their questions and their concerns and their health problems. And obviously people are already doing that with just ChatGPT now in general, but I just think that whatever is created has to have this nice handoff. That's if it's purely consumer facing, there needs to be a way to take that kind of conversation and that structure and get it ultimately to the hands of a clinician that can really weave in the expertise. Because I think if we do that well, we'll actually be able to allow clinicians to do more with really less effort. I mean, and that's I think that's what we're faced with a diminishing kind of pool and growing needs, growing healthcare needs out there.
And I don't think people truly understand like how much paperwork is involved for physicians. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like how, I mean, yes, being, doing the actual diagnosis and all those things, but could you tell people what it truly is like for the amount of documentation that you as a physician have to undergo when you see a patient?
Yeah, I think to a patient, it's like the only part that you really see is that interaction that you have, with the doctor. So if it's in the outpatient, it's like that time inside the exam room. Or if it's like a video visit, it's like that time that you're, actually talking. And yeah, in reality, for a patient encounter that maybe has a 20-minute block on your schedule, you're probably physically talking with the patient for about 10 minutes of that. So, and frankly, the other part of that time, unless you have really good tools to help you, it gets completely filled up with all the kind of pre-visit work that you're doing before, where you're trying to kind of prep yourself for that patient coming in. And then there's all the post-visit work that you're doing downstreams. And that's just for the encounter. And what you're kind of alluding to is all the other stuff that comes in. There's messages from pharmacy that are coming in, like for prescription clarifications or renewals. And in each of those, it's like you have to look at it. You may recognize the patient name, but it's like you have to look in the chart. So doctors are constantly searching and looking at context and trying to figure out things. And then there's prior authorizations and all sorts of things that come down that just require even more investigation and detail. So I think of a doctor's day, you don't actually get to spend a ton of time face to face with patients. And I think what we need to strip down to is allow doctors to do more of that, more of helping with these ultimate decisions and thought processes for someone's health, and help strip away all that extra stuff. And that's where I think technology and workflow optimization will really help.
I appreciate you sharing that because as I've got, been in the healthcare industry for a while and have learned, supported physicians in some areas, I've just been blown away by how much I didn't know, right, as to what really all it entails to be a doc. So thank you for that. And so now looking back on your personal transition, what's one internal shift, whether either mindset, values, or identity, maybe you alluded to that a little bit earlier, that surprised you the most throughout this process?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I mean, I'd say I would say the mindset shift. I guess I'd circle back a little bit to what I said before. I think it's jumping from that real kind of structured kind of piece of a traditional healthcare system to this startup space where everything is just happening rapid. And so I think what was challenging for me was like the speed at which some of these things would happen. And so I came from a place where, I thought I was kind of pushing the envelope and kind of pushing people to do things and pushing out kind of tools that to getting to a point where now things are even coming faster than I'm like comfortable with. And I think, so for me, it's more of, I have had to be much more okay with with things being maybe a little bit shaky to start with. And yeah, you got to try working, you got to try them and test them out and pressure test and then iterate really quickly and improve. And I think I've always wanted to do that, but it's like finally now I'm in an environment that you have the opportunity to actually do that in real life. And so that's been something where I've really had to um, kind of shift and be okay with.
Kudos to you. Appreciate that. And so would love to get some advice for you. So like for someone who is working inside of an institution and they want to bring innovation or change to some of the work that they're doing, but truthfully they feel kind of stuck. What's your best advice, or what would your best advice be to them in order to move those things forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in a especially in like a larger organization is something that you have an idea for. You have to get other people around you that are also kind of the influencer kind of decision makers. You have to try to get them on board. And I think, that might sound like a little schemy, like you got to go to the person, who's going to kind of help kind of push something, but I honestly think that's the best approach. So if you're like a frontline person that maybe doesn't have kind of this a leadership role where you feel like you have a lot of decision making, I think you have start sharing that idea with others. Try and get a groundswell of people that also feel that way, and then work across and find those other people in there that you can talk to and them on board with what you're really wanting to do. I just think having that people connection is still the best bit of advice to really help with influence and change. Otherwise, you can just be a big megaphone, that's like blasting out. And I think that approach isn't very successful most of the time.
I agree with you there. And what's one thing you think people misunderstand about leaving a successful role to pursue something that may be a little more less defined? And how would you reframe that risk for them in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the big thing that I always thought of, and plenty of people told me this too when I was contemplating making the leap, is people always said you could always go back if it doesn't work out. If you try a new job and it doesn't work, it's okay to be like, okay, I thought it was going to be this and it wasn't. And so I think for me, I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. I was like, if this doesn't work out, I can find something else. And so I think you just have to be okay with the potential for, for something that you may think was going to be a certain way and it ends up not being. And I think that's okay. I think the biggest inertial like leap is taking that first kind of change. I've had some buddies who I worked with that left the organization a little bit before me and everyone always says like that first job you leave is the hardest. And then after that, it tends to be easier to kind of consider hopping. So I think, yeah, just being aware that you can always go back, and it's not like you're ending something and you've burnt the bridge and you can't go back to what you were doing before.
That's great advice. And so now I would love to flip the mic, and you're a host, so you're familiar in this space. So what's one question you have for me that I could hopefully answer?
Yeah, I obviously love fellow casters too, and I would love to understand why you settled on like this specific topic yourself. Obviously, you've hosted some amazing people on your show, but yeah, what was the inspiration behind that origin?
Yeah. So for me, I think it was when the Great Resignation was happening, and given my background in law and HR, specifically employment law and HR, I was just really intrigued by people leaving their roles during this time of instability. And so what I wanted to do was really explore the mindset, truthfully, behind those exits. And as the show has grown, now it's just, we talk about bold transitions regardless of the timing in which they've occurred. And so the reason I settled on this is because I truly don't think we talk about resignations enough. It's still kind of taboo, right? Like there may be a little shame or whatever, embarrassment about someone leaving a job voluntarily, right? Now, obviously people get exited and riffed often, right? But voluntarily leaving, there's a lot of questions that come up. And so I think it's important that we talk about these things. A lot of things online are someone 7x this in 90 days and all this stuff, but that's not real life. Like we go through these processes and we we go through these changes, and sometimes people feel like they're alone in that. And I'm hopeful that this platform helps people feel less alone. And so that thinking about that and thinking about resignations as a whole is truthfully why I really started the show, because I wanted to create this space where we talked openly and honestly about leaving a job. And I'm flexible. Whatever road they want to go down, I'm happy to go down that road, but it's all about that. So that's really why the show is. And I've enjoyed it, right? Because it is it's a little bit of a social experiment. I didn't think about that in the beginning, but it's a little bit of a social experiment to really understand the mindset behind all this.
Yeah. No, I love it.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great
No, that's
question. Well,
great.
look, I appreciate you joining the show today, and would love for you to share where our listeners can, find the Substack, find your work, all the things, find the show. So we'd love for you to share that info.
Yeah. No, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. I would say I'm most active on LinkedIn as a social network. So obviously people can find me there, but I have the easiest path to finding me in general is my homepage, which is rewski.com, rewski.com. That's a nickname that was given to me in college from a basketball buddy, and because my last name Carewe, and he was like struggling with pronouncing it, and he's just like, okay, I'm calling you Rewski. And so rewski.com takes you right to the Substack, and basically from that Substack you can pop out. The podcast is hosted on there, and then obviously I blog on there, both for Nerd MDs and then also kind of some consumer tech stuff. So that's the easiest path to finding me and connecting.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Dr. Adam Carewe, for joining us today. I'll be sure to have all of his info in the show notes. And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Adam, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for listening to Why I Left. Join us next time for more inspiring stories about growth, resilience, and transformation. Visit us online at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co.